everybody. So yeah, interfacing. I guess a few of you guys, when you go to your favorite big box craft or sewing store, you get a little overwhelmed because bags require a lot of different kinds of interfacing. So what is interfacing? Interfacing is a structural component, a different kind of fabric that you put on top of your base fabrics, your actual fabric that's going to be your bag, to help give it structure, define its shape, and make it last a long time. It's also comes in like a fusible form, so if it wants to drive you nuts, then you can spend an hour at an ironing board. That's up to you. So interfacing is a really important part of bag making, and it's one of those skills that people pick up kind of over time as they work with bags. But bag patterns have become a lot more accessible with PDF formats from Swoon, Blue Collar, and all these different companies that are out there, and they actually tell you what you need for your bag. So let's go through a few of the different types of interfacings that you'll come up with as you go through your bag patterns, so that you have a better understanding of why you use them and when they're best used. Also, feel free to leave comments in the video section below so that other people can learn different ways and different techniques for using said interfacings. So let's go. So the first kind of interfacing we're going to talk about tonight is the woven interfacing. This is going to be your general purpose interfacing that you use on pretty much every aspect of bag making. They are basically really lightweight cottons that have glue dots on them. And it looks pretty much like a very nice lightweight batik or like a backing to a quilt. It can be loosely woven. It's more popularly referred to as Shape Flex, which is the brand name under Pellon. But you can also buy Woven Fuse 1, and then there's Woven Fuse 2, which has a smoother backing on it with a glue base, and I actually prefer this stuff. I'll put all the information in the comment section below so you can see the details on that. But I tend to tell people you're going to use this on everything, hence the reason it's general purpose. But this interfacing is really popular to use like alongside the other interfacings that we're going to be talking about. For example, fleece interfacings and foam interfacings and stabilizers. So while you don't have to use both, I usually recommend that you do, because a lot of those other interfacings tend to shrink or don't provide additional structure to a lighter weight fabric like a quilting cotton. Now, Decobond is like a medium weight stabilizer, and you don't see this mentioned too often as a fabric that, or interfacing rather, that you should use with bags, but I actually love using it to stabilize card slots and wallets. It doesn't look terribly heavyweight. It's more of a medium weight type of interfacing, but once you've fused it to like a standard quilting cotton weight fabric, maybe 120 GSM, you can fold it and make creases in it, and so that makes it a lot easier for you to make your card slots faster. So I tend to actually just accordion fold them up and steam them into place. So Decobond is mostly for home decorative stuff, but if you really need like a stiffer section that isn't tough to stitch through, the Decobond is really great for that. Now, fleece interfacing is what it sounds like. It's a fleece-like material that has fusible glue dots on one side of it. It's not terribly structured, but once it's fused to fabric, it actually tends to hold a really decent shape. It's great for hobo bags, for slouchy bags, anything that kind of needs to have a little give to it, but not necessarily be stiff as a board like a leather laptop bag. So like I tend to use these with my Mighty Messenger bag pattern, for example, because I like the messenger bag to have a little bit of give, so it slumps against the body. So sometimes when you're choosing interfacings, you really have to think about that. Now, the one thing I would say about the fusible fleece is it tends to shrink up a little bit. So the trick that I have for this is to first fuse woven interfacing to my fabric. Bear with me. Then I fuse the fleece, rip it off, and put it back on. So if you're wondering like, okay, well, fleece, great, but I'm standing at the aisle in Joann's and I don't know what the heck doodle I'm looking at. Well, you need to look for Thermolam. Thermolam is one of the names, and let's be honest, there really is only one brand of interfacing that we all purchase. But general purpose wise, we all say Fleece so we don't get sued in our patterns. All right, now, foam is the fun one. And I'm not just trying to be funny. I mean, it's actually quite the fun one. So, and as you can tell, I buy all this stuff on the Bolt, which I'll get to in a bit. However, foam is something that you can use if you really want to maintain your shape. A really big tote bag, a messenger, laptop bag, Switch case for your Nintendo Switch. Had to do it. So yeah, it's basically a tricot knit that's on either side of it, and embedded is about an 1/8 of an inch layer of foam. And you may think, well, I can't, that's really thick, I can't sew on that at all. No, really, it's not a big deal. It's very porous and it's very easy for the needle to glide in and out, and it doesn't add too much bulk if you do the right thing. And so what I tell people is to take the piece, cut it out, zigzag around the edge once you've placed it onto your actual fabric. And what that'll do is that'll compress down the edge that's going to end up in your seam allowance, and so it won't really be that bulky. It'll also do the whole basting it down so that it doesn't slip around as you're working on it. And the other thing you can do, if you have trouble like placing it and keeping it together and you don't want to pin it, you can use basting spray. And so I spray down the main fabric, I attach the foam, and then I zigzag around the edge. And you don't need like a tight zigzag, you just need like a really small zigzag that's not so wide that it goes over your seam allowance. The other thing to remember about foam is it does come in like a fusible format. Highly recommend not to get it fusible. The bubbles between don't really work very well, and sometimes it can actually cause the fabric to wrinkle quite heavily if you're birthing the bag. If you're doing a drop-in lining, Godspeed. But I really would stay away from the fusible version of it. It's just not as durable. All right. Stabilizer is this extremely stiff fabric and interfacing. It does come in fusible formats. You can get it sew-in, fusible on one side, or fusible on two sides. Now, I've never actually used the fusible version of it. I tend to stick to the sew-in kind, so I can't really speak to it. You do want to keep this stuff out of your seam allowance. This stuff is thick, and I mean THICC thick. So normally what I would do with this is cut it to the shape of the pattern piece, such as the bottom of a bag or the flap of a messenger, and cut away whatever the seam allowance is going to be. And then I would fuse it down to one side, but using another layer of woven interfacing to kind of sandwich it and tack it around the edge, and it'll just stay within that pocket that you create from the fusing. For flaps, I tend to just like cut away the seam allowance and slip it into the flap after I flipped it right side out, but before I top stitch, because the top stitching will attach it and it won't slide around or be a jerk, you know, and because bags can be jerks. Anyway, watch the birthing video for that part. So this stuff, like I said, super stiff. And again, you can get it fusible if you want. I just don't normally do fusible interfacing outside of the woven and the fleece, Thermolam type materials. But yeah, this is primarily used on messenger bag flaps, the backs of backpacks, the bottom of bags, anything that you need to maintain its shape and to have a very stiff structure. Bigger tote bags are a good use of this too. Again, usually your patterns will guide you on what you need to use, and I would say go with it and listen to the pattern maker, because usually they know what's best. Usually. I don't.
In the year 2019, bag makers everywhere were in a panic. Deco Ville was out of stock and it couldn't be found. Bag makers had to hide their stash in closets. It was absolute chaos.
Right, so Deco Ville. Deco Ville is a leather-like interfacing with glue on one side of it. It is a really good replacement for foam or fleece if you're using the light version. And you can also replace the Peltex, the stabilizer I was talking about earlier, with the heavy version. There are really big price differences. Pellon does carry Deco Ville brand in a way. It's the same thing. So the only kicker is when you buy it in the States, it's only 17 inches wide. So be careful and buy it when you see it and then hoard it. Promptly hoard it. So, but for Deco Ville Light, this is the one I use the most. This is actually the same little sheet of a half a yard of Deco Ville Heavy that I've had for almost a year now. I tend to use the light the most on things like messenger bag flaps and on the backs of backpacks, the bases of bags. And to be perfectly honest with you, if you want, you can like double or triple up on it if you want to replace the stabilizer. So the last thing isn't really an interfacing, but it's more of a bag making tool, and I do think that it's important to cover these kinds of things. So it's actually pattern paper, and you can get it with the 1 inch by 1 inch grids at any of your popular stores. This is the Pellon version of it. And I use this to trace and to build up patterns for bags. The 1 inch grid helps a ton. It's semi-transparent, so that means that I can see through it when I'm working with my fabrics. And also, like, if you just want to create a permanent version of a pattern, but you can't afford the acrylics and you don't want to deal with like placemat cutting, this stuff works really well. It's very sturdy. You can pin it. You can weigh it down with pattern weights. Love this stuff. So now that we've gone over each of the different interfacings and roughly what they're used for and what you would apply them to, let's go ahead and demonstrate the fusing process. This is going to be a fairly quick demo because there really isn't a whole lot to it. I'm going to give you some tips and some tricks for fusing your interfacings, but outside of that, it's really not that bad. Also, just as a note, please don't be afraid of my iron. Normal irons don't don't do what this one does. If you can see, this is an ollie sew. Not an advertisement, just quite literally trying to tell you guys for safety. This pops down when it detects that it's been held and then pops up when it's not in use. And so I'm not trying to burn my house down right now yet. So first I'm going to do this demonstration initially with just a plain quilting cotton. As you can see, I have this here. This is just something I bought at Joann's. And then I've got a woven interfacing. So it's a nice thinner, you can kind of see it has nice loose woven weave to it. And then I have some of my fleece interfacing, which is the Pellon Thermolam. And then I have a sample of the Deco Ville Light. So one of the things I tell people is if you pre-wash your fabrics, you don't need to really worry about this step. However, if you don't pre-wash, I kind of advise taking your piece of fabric and going over it and steaming it and ironing it just a smidge before you apply the interfacing. And this is because it may still have like a tiny bit of wrinkling and shrinking as a result. And so this gets it into like the best shape possible. Now, you're going to flip your fabric over right side down. All of your interfacings go to the back of the fabrics. You're going to take your bit of interfacing, and if you want, forgot about that. If you want, what you can do is you can take a like a Teflon sheet. Just Google Teflon sheet or go look at Amazon. They're awesome. I will also put a link below. Or a pressing cloth. You don't really have to. It just depends on the level you want to go to protect your fabric. If you have your iron on the correct setting, which is usually linen or cotton, then you're going to be totally fine. Take your iron and press down as hard as you can and hold for 10 seconds. Yeah, waiting music. It's great. Okay, and then you're gonna lift. And you'll notice I didn't like rub around, and I also have turned off steam. You don't wanna have steam because what that's gonna do is that's gonna cause the glue dots to get all moist and wet, and it won't actually stick or glue down, and you'll find that you'll have a harder time. Steam will cause like a nice burst of heat, but it also introduced moistness to your fabric and to the interfacing, and so it's not gonna stick as well. If you want, you can press again. And mind you, this whole thing, your iron is very small, so you're going to have to lift and press. If you rub around like this, then you run the risk of heating up the glue balls in here, and it'll slip and slide and cause your fabric to skew. This is more apparent on patterns that have straight lines, and it just ugh. So yeah. Now this is where I tell people you need to put fleece And Deco Ville or other medium weight interfacings on top of the woven interfacing. Again, you don't have to, it's just in my experience I have found that the bag has a lot more structure and lasts a lot longer if you give it the woven interfacing before you put on your fleece, foam, what have you. Okay, so I'm gonna do one half of this with the fleece and then the other half I will do with the Deco Ville. Now with fleece interfacing, it is imperative that you not use steam. Like, I don't care if you guys use steam with the woven fuse, whatever, but if you use the steam with the fleece, you're in for a world of pain. So again, like I said, sometimes the fleece can wrinkle up the fabric and shrink it. You know, that just really depends on if you pre-washed or pre-pressed or did anything else to kind of treat your fabric. But yeah, sometimes it's okay and sometimes it isn't. If you flip it over and you see that you have a touch of wrinkling, which I don't on this piece because it's just so small, rip it off really quickly while it's still warm and then put it back down and go again. You'll be totally fine. Trust me, there will be plenty of glue dots there. And again, you know, like the woven fuse does help abate that problem. But yeah, sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't. So, yeah, as you can see here, it's nicely compressed, but it does make a nice sturdy bit. Now we're gonna go on the other side of this and we're gonna apply the Deco Ville. And so again, we're gonna press down and hold for 10 seconds. And again, I'm keeping the linen and cotton setting. If you feel you need higher or lower, go with that. The important thing is that you hit all those glue dots and that in those 10 seconds, they melt and spread out and will stay glued to the fabric forever. Okay, and then lifting. Now, the important thing is between presses, don't go and start immediately messing with your fabric. Don't take this over to the sewing machine and you know, start sewing it or messing with it or anything. Let it cool down. That glue has to set. And so if you immediately get up and go and sew with it, it's not going to be fully set and cured. You know, it's kind of like resin, only without the 24-hour annoying wait for a glitter ball. So yeah, see, it's just not set. So if you find that the corners are usually the worst part, but go back over it and just press down and hold. All right. And that's basically it. So if you're annoyed by the ironing, which trust me, eventually you will be once you get to the point where you want to make bigger bags or you want to make 2 or 3 or 20 at the same time, you can actually opt for something called a steam press or a heat press. So I offer those as options. They do have a wider area for catching and interfacing in general, whereas the iron is very small. So I do have a video, which I will also link below, that goes over production tools that I use in my bag making, and I do cover a heat press in that. So as far as pricing goes, I tend to avoid discussing prices in videos because then I run the risk of being as bad as a rerun of a Price is Right episode from the 80s. What I will say is I tend to save coupons for Joann's and just buy the interfacing by the bolt, especially woven interfacing, as I use that the most. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to learn more about interfacing for bag making. Feel free to like or subscribe. I also stream Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays on Twitch, and it's a live stream where you can come in and talk to me about all kinds of things, but really sewing. Like, absolutely. Like, we never talk about anything else but sewing. I'm lying.